Welcome to the Jess Larsen Show on innovation and leadership. I'm excited to have my friend back on the show, Dan Cooper. Dan, thanks for doing this.
Great to be with you again.
So, for anybody who missed when you were on last time, founder of Return on Character, can you talk to us about the strategy and what you guys do?
Well, at the heart of what we do is really being inspired by the research that's focused on the behavior of corporate leaders and the consequence of that behavioral research on performance. And about 20 years ago, when I was working for my mentor, Joe Ritchie, um, he turned to me one day, kind of in a fluke, and I don't know if he was just kind of having daydreaming, but he said, "Hey, it wouldn't be amazing to know who the good character CEOs are in the marketplace." Um, and at the time, I was reading the book Good to Great, and learning all about level 5 leaders. And I was also working with this industrial site company that helped other companies find certain personality types for certain jobs. And I kind of sheepishly put my hand up and said, "Joe, I think I could go do that." And that's what I did. So I went out and built a behavior-based interview around Jim Collins's level 5 leadership, and started interviewing Wall Street analysts and asking them questions they'd never been asked before. Like, of the companies you follow, who would put the company before their own interest? Or of the companies that you follow, which CEOs are more humble than they are arrogant? Or tell me about a story of when a CEO stood up and owned a mistake, or when things went well, they gave credit to their team. And so I just started building this system that actually quantified the degree of our confidence in the way in which CEOs were behaving in various different sectors, built a portfolio around it, and we allocated capital purely on the basis of that one factor. Back then, of course, it was pretty novel. I don't know if anyone else was doing it, but Joe Ritchie was the man that had the courage to try, and I was the luckiest guy in the world to be able to be the implementer and kind of the developer of it. But that's how it got started, Jess.
Well, since we've been hanging out and doing things together, I went and got the book Return on Character and become a Fred Keel fan. And it's interesting to me to be able to see like it tracked over time and documented and peer reviewed. And, I was influenced just by you talking about this. And then that
Yeah.
book was kind of like the 1-2 punch for me. Can you talk a bit about the book?
Yeah, the book came along a lot later. Actually, it came along. I had gone off and sowed my wild oats and tried to build a railroad in Africa for a period of time. And while I was there, Fred Keel wrote this book called Return on Character, and it was a 7-year study of what he called virtuoso CEOs and self-centered CEOs. And he analyzed the company's performance during the period of 7 years, and discovered that virtuoso CEOs outperform the self-centered CEOs by 5x over time. Their companies also tended to have lower debt and higher return on equity and higher employee engagement. And and it was so intriguing that Harvard Business Review published a book. And when I was coming back to the United States and I started thinking about what the next phase was, I really had this feeling in my gut, like, you know, as a society, we needed something, some way to affirm character. And of course, I couldn't help but reference my original strategy. And uh, I Googled one day. I Googled, "Does anyone care about character anymore?" And that's how I discovered that book that you read, Jess, and referenced. And I ended up calling Fred and subsequently the CEO of KRW, which is the affiliated company that helps companies develop character. And they ended up leading our research for this round, which was the eventual development of ROC Investments investment strategy. One of the things that I think it's important to kind of to go back, and I, that's a big piece of foundational research. I think Collins's work on level 5 leadership is another seminal piece. But what was fun is I was able to go back and look at the original character fund that Joe and I developed to see how that developed. And so for 4.5 years, when we were investing in it live, it outperformed very, very well on a market cap basis. It was equally weighted to the S&P. 20 years later, we went and looked and said, well, what if we had not stopped investing and continued to invest, only dropping companies when CEOs retired? And that same high rate of return continued for 20 years. And then we analyzed why. Because in the financial industry, there's lots of reasons why certain performance could be attributed to other things that you didn't mean for them to be attributed, i.e., it didn't mean that character really was the contributing factor. And we analyzed that, we did a factor analysis, and the factor analysis found that only 30% of that outperformance over the 20 years was attributed to traditional factors, which means not character. 70% of the outperformance was attributed to something we'd never seen before. And we came to believe that we kind of just stumbled onto a new factor, which is the leadership factor, as I like to call it, the character factor. And so that was like the third leg of the stool of research that just gave us a lot of confidence that there's something here. That even if you didn't believe in character, or it was a signal that had nothing to do with good behavior, it was a strong enough signal to say, man, this is worth starting an investment strategy around. We just happen to have kind of the benefit of an impact connection to the story, but it really did start off with the premise that we're trying to identify an inefficiency in the market.
Well, we talked about this a while back, in Good to Great, when he says, I was determined that we weren't going to put something fluffy in the book like leadership,
Yeah,
you know, and basically somebody on my team came and confronted me and said, I thought you cared about the data, and the data says leadership does matter. And
right.
I had to go back on what I was sure the answer was because the data proved me wrong. So
I
I
love
actually,
that. Yeah,
right, which shows his
mhm,
character. But
yeah,
I got to have so the guy who did that. So they reference the 26,000 hours of research that went into that
mhm,
book. And
yep,
again, I think one of the reasons that book is so relevant all these years later still is empirically based. Like, they gave numbers. I mean, haven't
yep,
we all read the book that's like, you're pretty sure the author came up with the idea first and just hunted around for an anecdotal story to
right.
prove his point,
That's
you
right.
know, where he was
Mhm,
willing to do things like change his outputs based on the data, right?
yeah.
So that guy's name is Nate Bagley, I believe.
Hmm,
Uh, I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure it's Nate Bagley. And if you look at the photo at the front of all those interns and research assistants and stuff,
yeah,
he, it'll be listed there. I think he might be the first name, but he was the lead researcher. So that whole big team, he was the lead researcher working on the project. And so he got elected the one to go say, Jim, you're wrong. So I got to have a phone call with him once talking about that. You know, what was that like from the other side of having to go tell
oh my
Jim he was
gosh.
wrong? And it was just like, it was black and white. Like, it showed up in the data, and so we had to bring it up.
Right, and I love that we can stand on those research projects and feel confident that there's evidence behind the theory, and um, and it's given me kind of fire in my belly to launch the first strategy that is available to the public that allocates capital purely on the basis of character. And what we ended up doing this round, Jess, is we borrowed from Fred Keel's book, Return on Character's Definition. And he went around and basically broke down the four elements of character: integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion. And these were the four things that he saw as behavior characteristics in the virtuoso CEOs. So the ones that best exhibited those four character habits outperformed. The ones that didn't have those four character habits actually underperform. And so that's what we do. We go out there into the market and we try to pick up what I like to say, like little shavings of gold that most people just kind of throw out, and stories, analytical research using artificial intelligence and other things to mine for these little shavings and then value them and have them become kind of a consideration of how we choose the companies we invest in.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the things that's a little bit fun about that story is you proved it with your own results and your own data. Jim College and Stanford University and their 26,000 hours of research proved
Right.
it. Fred Keel and his 7-year study and all those people in the peer reviewed. And I like Fred's story where it's like, we'd done 3 years and we went and had it reviewed and they said, come back with more. So we did more. He came back and said, come back with more. Like, like this like short-term project ended up being 7 years long. But it is
Right.
interesting that the three of you independently came to the same conclusions, unaffiliated with each other. Like
Yes.
that's fun.
Yep.
Um, but I think another reason that I was kind of getting excited about this when you started teaching me about it a few months back was it just has a ring to kind of one of my investing heroes. So, one of the most devout followers of Warren Buffett, but applying it to the real assets world is Howard Marks at Oak Tree Capital. A lot of people will
Mm.
know,
Mhm.
and he is consistently saying like, "Hey, listen, I was at Chicago, University of Chicago when modern portfolio theory was getting invented and this idea that
Mm.
there's efficient markets and all that garbage." And he's like, obviously in the years since it's been proven to be wrong, right? But he says there is an aspect of it that people discount, which is if you do have this same information as everyone else, why would you think that you're going to invest so much better than others? And he says,
Right.
one thing like this, sometimes they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater on that stuff is having to look in the mirror and saying like, what do I claim that I know that others don't? Because if I
Mhm.
don't claim to know things that others don't, why do I claim I'm going to get a better return than others? Right.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
if you read his books, which Mastering the Market Cycle has got to be one of the best ever, the most
Yeah.
important thing is endorsed by Warren Buffett, right? I mean, these are great books. You read his memos, or I just listen to him on Spotify now as his podcast. He reads them,
Mm.
which is great. But he's constantly saying, you claim you're going to get a higher rate of return. Please share with me your information edge. What do you what do you know that's not? It's why he likes opaque markets. He does credit, he does real estate, he does things where there is more chance of having superior insight or an information edge.
Mhm.
And when you talk about what you guys do, it's like the questions nobody else asks these analysts.
Yeah.
Well, by definition, they're unlikely to have the answers that you have because they haven't been asking. You talk
Yeah.
about these little bits of coal that get shaved off that other people don't care about because they're worried about what's our return on capital employed. They're worried about these metrics, but they're
Yeah.
not asking about the metric you've got. Like it's clearly an information edge that's a competitive advantage.
It's the basis of our the origination of the entire approach, because it was actually our inability to slice and dice known books of data and information and compete on Wall Street. So, geez, we're never going to compete in that, that arena. But if we go over here and we pivot a little bit, it doesn't look like anyone's even putting a value for that. So I'll give you an example. Like, um, I was with Tim Senegal yesterday for like 4 hours, and yeah, he's the CEO and founder of Costco, and he was on our original character strategy way back when, and he told me a story about how um, there was this warehouse that discovered, the managers at this warehouse discovered that in their lease they were supposed to be paying an incremental more every year to the owner of the building. And the owner of the building never contacted him or them, the company, and said, "Hey, you owe us a little bit more every year." And so for 15 years, they kept on paying the same amount. And in the lease, it pointed out that the owner of the building was supposed to notify the tenant, but it never happened. And the people at that Costco warehouse came and said, "Look, you know, we technically should probably pay these guys. Came to corporate headquarters, ran it up the flagpole, and they said, absolutely. And they dished out over $1 million in back pay without even having to do it. Right. And they, Jim told me, he said, we didn't put that cost on the warehouse. We paid it at corporate level. So it wouldn't reflect that on the numbers. But the thing, and this is the thing that stuck with me, is that he said something like, what would our employees think if we didn't honor that agreement? How would they feel about the company? Would they be proud to work here? And okay, so you hear a story like that. Let's say you're a Wall Street analyst and you're doing your numbers and your analyst report, at Goldman. How do you factor in a story like that into the valuation of the company and
Well,
explain?
well,
No,
it's
I'm going to give an extra 2% because of this little story here, or something like that. The valuation, it's very difficult. I mean, I don't think they've ever done it. And so to me, but if any of us were to kind of sit around and talk about it, we say, well, geez, that's some strong evidence of some pretty thoughtful leadership that's growing a very strong culture that will probably help the company prevail for years and years in advance. But how do you put that information to work? And that's the kind of information we love to find on companies, along with other bits of data. And that's the edge we hope to contribute.
well, and frankly, others aren't quantifying it and trading on it. You
No,
know what I mean?
I don't
Uh,
think so.
you know,
Not at volume.
again, for me, the gold standard investing is the Warren Buffett Charlie Munger duo, right? And you look at what a diehard fan of Costco Charlie Munger is, right? And
Yeah,
those two are constantly saying things like, what you really want is you want someone who's very intelligent, high activity, very industrious, and high integrity. And the last one of those three is the most important because otherwise they're going to be intelligently and smartly working at trying to make your money their own instead of
yeah.
trying to make more money for you. And it's not a surprise that those type of actions over time have created such a fan of like the most famous investing duo in the history of the world.
Jim told me that Charlie told Warren years ago that he should buy Costco stock, and it's the one of the two pieces of advice Warren did pick up that he regrets to this day.
um, so I'm interested, there's obviously a lot of people watching today or listening to this episode on audio that really wish they had the chance to go spend an afternoon with Jim Senegal yesterday.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
what's another insight or what's a reflection on having spent that time with him yesterday that you have?
One obvious one is this guy doesn't want to be proudful in any way. He doesn't like talking about himself. Over 50 people have asked to write a book about him, and he turns them down because he thinks it might give him an ego trip, and he's guarding against things like that. Uh, he he is not interested in any way as being boastful or prideful, and to almost a fault, I would tell him, I'd say, "Come on, you need to share some of these gems with the world," and he just can't bring himself to do it. uh, you know, at a big scale. Of course, he's had some big interviews over time, but he's not looking for accolades. Another example, another great story, and this is a tribute to the current CEO, Craig. He said he told me the story about how they were selling these diamonds, and there's diamond cases in the entrance of the store, and they had marked them cut like Tiffany diamonds, you know. And he says, "Yeah." He goes, Dan, I should never have let them say, to mark them that way, because soon after I left, which was in 2012, somewhere along the line, the cut light just dropped out, and it just got Tiffany diamonds on it, right? And so pretty soon, all these diamonds that were cut this way just said Tiffany diamonds on, and they weren't. And of course, the Tiffany company lawyers up and comes in and says, you're in violation. This is terrible. And and Costco's lawyers, of course, they respond as a lawyer should. Well, okay, well, we need to be careful what we say. And Craig came forward and he said, look, we screwed up and we need to own our mistake. And he didn't lawyer up. He sat down with with Tiffany's and worked it out, you know. And again, that's an example of the Costco culture carrying on to the next, next steward of the culture, which was Craig, the current CEO. Uh, anyway, Costco is a great example of the kinds of companies that we look for, and there's not a lot out there, but we hope to find them.
I love that story. Another person of high character that I know we both look up to is your former mentor, Joe Ritchie. A guy who makes hundreds of millions of dollars, one of the most well-known options traders. And it's interesting that he then goes for such a long-term strategy of, yeah, Dan, let's just invest in character and let it ride. You know,
Well,
uh,
I have to let you in on a little secret here. We actually started off by collecting both good information on CEOs and really bad information. And the whole idea was to go long the good guys and short
oh,
the bad
really?
guys initially. And so we were going to lever that, come up with a nice little quantitative trading model. And like 4 months into the strategy, the shorts were just slaughtering us, just killing us. Right. And we slowly sobered up to the fact that the quote unquote self-focused or the bad guys and girls are the best at manipulating truth. They're the best at kind of pretending everything is okay. And so it became a market timing question. Like, when are they going to blow up? We had no idea. So we took off the shorts. And truth be known, Joe was most excited not about the making of the money of the strategy. He was most excited about knowing who the great leaders in the markets were, because we applied that knowledge to kind of our, he wouldn't like to call it this, but our philanthropic efforts and with Rwanda. And so uh, I took President Kagame on roadshows to meet a lot of these CEOs in our fund. And Jim Senegal was one of them. And it's kind of a funny story. I got to tell you
Well,
this
can,
one.
can we pause for 1 second here?
Yeah, yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
I think we got to give people context because they might not have heard the last episode that we did together last
Sure.
summer. Like, Joe makes these hundreds of millions of dollars and he's like, let's make the world better. And you guys like go to Afghanistan and work to try to overthrow the Taliban before 9/11. And you're
Yes.
like, you guys are doing like serious stuff, working with the State Department, doing all these things. And so, can we have just like a tiny bit of background of how you end up flying all over the country with the Secret Service, escorting these heads of state to meet Fortune 500 CEOs?
Yeah, it's a total testament to Joe Ritchie, my mentor's uh, always innovative approach to trying to uh, impact the world. And one of the things that he said that I think was really wise is that anytime you try to do philanthropy, the further away you get from eyeball to eyeball connection with those that you're trying to help, the higher the odds you're going to do damage. And so we tended to get involved really deep personally in things. And Joe grew up in Afghanistan as a little boy, and so he always had a love for the place. And so we ended up using Joe's influence in Washington, CIA, and State Department and other places to try to move the needle in certain issues around foreign policy, like in Iraq, Afghanistan was one, Rwanda was another, in the direction we thought was uh, better. And it was kind of Joe's version of philanthropy. Some people cut checks. Joe jumps in and tries to make a difference.
What
And we were afforded that because we were only managing his money. We weren't managing outside capital, so we could kind of get some things going on in the markets and then take time to go do things like this. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so, I mean, it's really sad for the world that you guys were on the steps of the State Department when you found out about 9/11. Like, think, man, what
Yeah.
if they'd been a little earlier, a little faster, right? Um, can you talk about Rwanda? This is post
Yeah.
genocide. The country's got what, like the worst economy in Africa at the time, or I mean, they were in tough shape or something, right? or am I
I
misremembering that?
I don't know. I don't know if it was the worst economy in Africa. I would say it was one of the worst brands.
Okay.
And I mean, a genocidal brand is probably the worst carried reputation you could have. And that was one of the things that we really focused on. And that was we had to find things that Rwanda could be known for outside of the genocide. And one of those things was President Kagame's leadership and his connection into or his ability to relate and connect with American industry. And our fund and our ability to help facilitate that really played a big role in helping him kind of get going in that direction.
And
Joe also,
essentially, the premise there
yeah,
was they needed help with trade, they needed help rebuilding their economy, they need help rebranding, and so you
mhm,
guys called these Fortune 500 CEOs like a Jim Senegal at Costco, arranged a
yeah,
meeting, had him fly over to the US and come spend one-on-one time and say, "Hey, is there anything you can do to help us with Rwanda, or what advice would you have for us?" Or give
yeah.
me some more
It
color on
was
that.
really based on relationship. I mean, there was no agenda. I mean, we flew in and met with Tim Boyle, the CEO of Columbia Sportswear, who was on our list. Nothing happened. But Tim became a fan, and he knows, Kagame and the Rwanda story as a consequence. On the upside, Jim and Costco ended up buying, I think, at one point, two-thirds of Rwanda specialty coffee and selling them at Costco, you know. And then Jim introduced Kagame to the CEO of Boeing, which started Rwanda's first airline. I was able to introduce the president to the CEO of Burlington Northern Railways, and he was another one of our high character CEOs, Matt Rhodes. And Matt jumped in and proved the viability of a railroad corridor from Dar es Salaam to Rwanda. All these individuals kind of played a role that was in their lane to play the role. And that's what I've found is that it's best to try to make a difference in the area you know best, and that's what we were kind of trying to do. We knew Denny Hastert at the time, who was the Speaker of the House, and Denny played a big role in helping get debt forgiveness um, to the country of Rwanda, and then of course Joe got Rick Warren involved, and Rick Warren in all his genius and force came in and started rallying the local churches in Rwanda, and to this day is still engaged, doing a lot of amazing things.
It's so unique to see government engagement, business engagement, and religion engagement. Like so often
Yeah,
those three are not associated as a trifecta, right?
no, no, it was a charmed time. I mean, I remember hosting gatherings at the White House with the Friends of Rwanda community, and it was just it was a special time. And when you're in them, you don't necessarily always recognize it. But it was an honor. And one of the things that I always dream about with this current strategy that we're running is to, at the right time to cross pollinate good people with other good people as we grow relationships and build the community of people that invest in character. Because that's what we really are all about. We want to identify folks that can character matters, willing to put their money behind it, and try to move the needle in the right direction. One of the things that we didn't talk about yet, but we think is a really big part of our company outside of just the research and the premise of the investment strategy is that if we're able to show over time that the portfolio can outperform the market, then the four characteristics that we screen for maybe and hopefully will start being screened for by boards of directors in Wall Street, and they'll start hiring CEOs on this basis because it's recognized as a way to help improvement. I think then the trickle down effect is that you're building cultures that just are healthier, and and I think ultimately community and the world is healthier for that as well. And so that's the grander vision that we hope to achieve and later on. But for now, we've launched our little strategy, and we're looking for people that care and want to join us.
Well, I think what's fun for me, like as we've gotten to know each other better too, is kind of like seeing who's in your circle. Like we've all met somebody who talks a really good game, but then the rest of their life doesn't back it up, you know? And like
Uh,
to me, like it's not just your friends, and I know some of your friends, right? But your investors. Like we got to interview John Montgomery together. And like
yeah,
I'm a fan. Like,
yeah,
how big is Bridgeway? Like 5 billion,
yeah,
right? And here's a guy who has given like so much of his personal earnings away to make the world better. And it's
yeah.
just like a high quality person. Um, is it, am I remembering this right? It's 50% of his fees that he makes.
50% of the company's profit, Bridgeway Capital Management, the company gives away to their foundation. And their foundation's mission is to help prevent acts of genocide in the world.
Yeah.
And
I read
yeah,
that book from his executive director, To Stop a Warlord. It was
yep,
so inspirational about going after Joseph Kony, right?
yeah.
So,
Shannon's a rock star. She's a dear friend. She's one of our board members. Yeah,
oh, I don't think I knew that.
yeah,
Really? That's awesome. Okay. So to me, the point of a guy like that who doesn't like, let's just say he doesn't need you. He's doing okay. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like his 5 billion wasn't built on your reputation. He doesn't need
That's right.
you, but he chooses you. Like to me,
Yeah,
that's one other thing because you know people like that in positions like that don't they don't do allocations lightly, right?
sure,
They
absolutely.
didn't get that big by being loosey goosey with their allocations.
Yeah,
And so to me, it's just like one more, again, one more kind of like testament to this methodology that people who are that serious, who have that kind of a track record over decades,
yeah,
have gotten behind you is just one more endorsement in my eyes.
yeah. No, I've been lucky. I mean, then you pair that up with Joe Ritchie and and a lot of other folks that been mentioned yet. And it's fun. But a lot of these people, you know, they discovered maybe early on that chasing after the feeling of doing good is a lot more rewarding than building your bank account or being seen as powerful or something like that. It's like they got clued into a little secret world most people in the world haven't realized, and they're living and they're chasing it, and it's a real gift to be around folks like that. And frankly, I think there's a lot of people like that. You don't have to be wealthy or famous or anything to recognize that. And I mean, one of the things about our podcast is that we launched to be able to kind of promote the value of character, Return on Character podcast, is we want to talk to both famous and not famous people who think character matters because everybody's story is valuable, uh, especially whenever they're espousing those values. And we just happen to always talk about all the famous people, which is great too. I have nothing wrong with that.
Well,
But
I think that's how you get people to pay attention so they can find out about those other people they should know about,
absolutely,
right?
yeah, I agree.
So, I want to I want to talk about something I don't know if I've asked you before. And maybe I won't name names here, but I like some of the ultra famous people that you can just call up. Okay, and I'll let you name names if you want to, but I'm just thinking about some of the people you've been on some private jets with and some things, and well, and like the Jim Senegals of the world that
Yeah,
just that are willing to take your call and like you're not like an active part of their life, but you made the kind of impression that they're willing to take your call and talk. And, as
yeah,
we've worked on your podcast together, like the kind of people that are considering being on it kind of things, right?
yeah,
That are like major wins for anybody kind of folks.
yeah,
Um, what do you think you have done differently in your relationship building where
yeah.
most people don't have that kind of relationship with people at that level?
I think there's a little bit of the Forrest Gump stumbling into life kind of aspect of me that has just happened. Um, I have this problem that I can never put a relationship, um, or jeopardize a relationship for my own self-interest. And I think that has bred a certain level of trust with folks. And maybe it's a vibe I put off. I don't know. But honestly, I just really care about them more than me. And, and I really care about them and their life. And I look for ways to champion what they're doing. And I get a lot of benefit from that too. There's just incredible benefit both on the experience side and support that's happened in the past. Um, but what I never want to be is a person that trades on their name, or their wealth, for my own benefit. And so I just try to be that way. And maybe that's why. I don't know. Personally, I think it's a lot funner to do it that way than to be angling for your own interests all the time. You start to get this kind of funny feeling in your gut. You're like, oh man, this isn't good. And you got to back off. Um, but maybe that's why. I don't know. That could be an answer.
But it does make me think about like a really prominent sales principle of like people buy who you are as much as what
Yeah.
you're selling. And so this idea of self-moderation of, you know, choosing integrity, choosing character, choosing these things, they don't pay off immediately. Sometimes manipulation pays off better immediately. But over the long haul,
Yeah.
like if you tell me to list like if you tell me, hey, Jess, who are like some of the most high integrity CEOs, business friends that you know, right? Like
Yeah.
the list comes to me pretty easy. Like I know a lot of good people, and
Yep.
I know a few like great people that
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
So I was talking about one of them today to someone else, and I said like, yeah, he's the kind of guy you can trust with your wife and your wallet
That's
and not
awesome.
worry about it. You know what I
Right.
mean? And that gets around. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, and there's also two measurements. Like we tend to look at the monetary measurement all the time, right? And there's also the measurement, can I look myself in the mirror, at the end of the day? Yeah. And that's a big one. So let's say you economically nosedive, but you still have kind of your self-respect. Uh, that's a win. And I don't care about those that don't recognize it as a win because I don't probably respect them very much, but there's enough people that do. And, uh, and so, to me, that's the first measurement of success. Uh, and that's the way I hope my boys turn out, my, I'm not going to, I'm not going to be excited if they're billionaires, but jerks. Um, I'll be disappointed. If they're not jerks and they care about other people and uh, live life with integrity and work hard and fail economically, I'll be so proud of them. And so that's how I try to kind of live, and that's when I believe also it pays in the long run and outperforms too. But I think that's one of the early secrets. And that really was taught to me by Joe. Joe never cared about economic wins. He only cared about doing the right thing.
which is funny that that it that it does bring in hundreds of millions of dollars in his case, you know?
Well, but you have to understand, he Joe, for those that don't know him, was an options and futures trader that kind of had, third from the bottom of his class and somehow grew this incredible big company called CRT. But he did it that he had innate genius for this. I mean, he was a mathematical genius, and
Which is
he
funny
is the
because he's
bill.
like not the he didn't like go to Cal Poly or Harvard or MIT or something. He's like a former
No,
cop and a like
I think he barely graduated like his algebra class. You know, but this is the thing. This is a great thing to bring up. So this guy revolutionizes the options and futures world, makes so many people multi millionaires. He himself very, very well, did very well. Um, and I was at his funeral recently. He died this year. No one mentioned his business. There wasn't even a reference to his economic success. What they talked about was all the ways he engaged in the world and made friends to help make make the world a better place. And people upon people got up on stage and talked about how Joe had helped them improve this nation or this situation or so on and so forth. And it wasn't anything to do with his wealth.
But he was
And
so
yeah,
personable. Like I,
yeah,
our mutual friend here, Lindsay Hadley, who we interviewed recently about her TED Talk, right?
yeah,
Lindsay had us come out and film him with Hugh Jackman's wife, Deborah Lee Furness, and the first
right.
lady
Hmm.
from Kenya, right?
Hmm.
And Joe's just like, he's just hanging out. He's like, he's not walking around like he's a big deal, you know?
No,
And another Lindsay thing. She got us into this event at the Vatican. They were doing like social impact investing, and we got to hang out with Joe. And it's not just Joe, like the family, the kids, his wife. Like his wife spent so much time talking to my wife about homeschool and public school and back and
yeah,
forth, and just like so engaged,
yeah,
minus the ego. You know,
yeah, yeah. You know, not all wealthy people are jerks or not human. There are a lot of really great people that are just normal, and I
but
think
that's not a
we get.
news. But that's not a news story. Being a jerk is a news story, so it gets
I
repeated
know,
like
I
crazy,
know,
right?
and it's a built-in assumption, right, all the time, and that's the other thing about return on character investments is that you really you're really looking for leaders that aren't jerks. I mean, that's kind of a crude way of saying it, but they are out there, you know, and it's also the refreshing aspect of doing this is that you're looking for good instead of just being in the muck and mire of bad all the time, and it's just a real pleasure to be able to do it, to do that as our focus.
Well, um, as always, it's a pleasure talking. I love that we get to co-host more episodes together these days. Um, for people who want to find out about the strategy and more about you, where are the best places online?
The best place to go is ROC, ROC, stands for return on character, but it's rocinvestments.com. And you can learn all about our strategy there and how you can participate. And the big thing uh, is that we really want to grow our community of people that think character matters. And so if you're interested, you can also email me at dan at rockinvestments.com. I would love to hear from you and tell you more about the strategy if you have any interest.
Ah, so great. Okay, well, what do you want to leave us with today?
Let's see. What do I want to leave you with? Um, Nothing comes to mind. I'm going to be honest.
Okay,
I think
okay.
I've dumped it all out on the
I got
floor.
two options for you then.
Okay.
Multiple choice. You can
Yeah.
either tell us what's something that you would go back and tell a younger version of yourself, or what's one of the best pieces of advice you ever received.
I picked the first one. Um, I would tell the younger version of Dan that life is really hard. Being an entrepreneurial is really hard. And that when it's really hard, it doesn't mean you're failing. And it doesn't mean um that you're an exception because all of us struggle. It's not a nice trajectory, graph that goes from the left up and to the right. Life's not that way. And so the sooner you can get over the fact that life is hard and celebrate the difficulties and maybe even celebrate more when you get the occasional wins, the more content you'll be.
That's solid. That was like straight to me. No, this is great. Okay. This is fun. Thanks again for doing this.
It's always fun talking to you, Jess.
Okay. Bye, everyone.